Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans, a stabby chaos coordinator, and a chief shenanigator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers at home, starting with Mr. Jordan Campbell. Jordan. Bueller.
Sorry, guys. I think I'm still cutting out a bit. Okay, so my
You okay, Jordan?
for about 3 years, and I have been outlining and trying to write novels since the Bush administration.
I guess that really depends on which one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were two of them.
Okay. With the last year of George W. Bush's administration, it barely counts for the time frame, but still.
We'll allow it. We won't throw a flag on the play.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next, we have Miss Melissa McShane, the War Mistress herself.
Thank you, JR. Hi, I'm Melissa McShane. I am the author of many, many fantasy novels in different subgenres and flavors of fantasy, including historical fantasy and urban fantasy and epic fantasy. I am here not as a writer of young adult fiction, but as a reader and critic. Before I was a writer, I was a literary critic, and my specialty was young adult fiction. So I have been around since before the current boom in YA fiction and fantasy. And I am interested in talking about it with my fellow panelists because it's something that I have a longstanding interest in.
Okay. How did you get into the book review space? Because
Okay, I wasn't a reviewer. My English degree specializes in criticism, literary criticism. So I studied a lot of stuff that I do not use that is full of crap, honestly. But I was...
You paid a lot of money for it, though.
Yes. Well, I was part of many different organizations. I was what's called a lay literary critic, which means I did not get paid. I did not have an official job. I was writing criticism for nonprofit organizations and for personal groups. One of the email groups I was part of was the Diana Wynne Jones list, DWJ list, and that was an early space for people writing about young adult fantasy in a time when young adult fantasy was not mainstream. We were any range from people who were actual academics to me to fans, and we wrote and discussed different fantasy novels. And so I did write reviews sometimes. More often I was writing analysis. And literary criticism is kind of got a bad rap because you get the idea from the word criticism that it's all negative, that it's tearing things down. But the truth is that literary analysis is about celebrating the joy of literature and writing about the beauty of how different books connect and talk to each other, and how you can understand one book by reading another. And I had a great time. It was something that I was interested in for a long time, and just kind of fell out of doing in the early 2000s, and then picked up writing fiction in 2013. So anyway, so that's my history. I was doing that for maybe 20 years. And it was great. It was just, and I'll talk about this on the panel probably, but it's such a big difference now from what you had back in the, well, even as early as the 70s and the 80s. There's been big changes, and it's really exciting in some ways and a little scary in others, honestly, but
that's
I find it fascinating.
one of the things about literary criticism people don't always realize is it's not just looking at the art specifically, but it's looking at the interplay of the art, the artist, and the artist's life. So, for instance, I was an English major before I had to solo down to a history degree because of deployment stuff. And like one of the things you don't realize is you look at the darkness that is Lord of the Rings when he's fighting the orcs and stuff, and then you realize if you study his life and what he fought at the Battle of the Somme, and he engaged in every major salient attack, which means all the major attempts to break out in the Battle of the Somme. He was one of the officers leading the charge as a young lieutenant, which means he's blowing the whistle first over the ramparts because British officers at the time very much led from the front. That's why they had such high casualty rates. And you start looking at his combat record, and I'm not saying he was like Joe Superhero Combat, like whatever. Like I don't know anything about his experience other than where he was and that he lived. Even just that tells you something, and then you start looking at that from a literary angle and how that had to have affected the way he wrote that story. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's so much that goes into it, so much that you can learn and study. And even if you're looking at it from a more traditional, and it's funny to call this traditional, but Marxist criticism and feminist criticism is very traditional now. Even when you're looking at it through whatever lens you're looking at it, you're looking at so many different aspects of culture and society, and the author's role within it that just affect how you can read a text, how you can read a story. And all of that, if you're doing it right, should make it so that you're loving the story more. It should not be about tearing something down. And I think there are way too many reviewers who go beyond just looking at the problems a book has and take joy in tearing it down and use that skill to sort of beat people with. And I think that's very wrong. I still write reviews. I write for my own pleasure reviews on Goodreads and get the occasional comment on how my review made them want to go and read the book. And that is highest praise.
And I actually, when I first started writing, at the time I was writing reviews because I was trying to, tweak the algorithm. When someone looked for a big name author in the genre I write in, and if I wrote a review, it tweaks my name too, as a way to kind of bootstrap myself up in the beginning. And I like reading. So, I mean, it wasn't a chore to write reviews, and it's good networking. And my general rule was if I didn't like a book, I wouldn't finish it. And if I didn't finish it, is it really fair to review it? So I only reviewed books I liked. And I was upfront about that. It wasn't that it was a softball, but I just, there's enough negative out there. Unfortunately, like rage bait sells and it gets clicks. I just never did that.
It's hard when you have something. Okay, I have the highest rated 1-star rating of Ready Player One on Goodreads, and I wanted to love that book. I thought it had serious flaws, and I wrote about them. And I got a lot of hate mail about it, and I got just as much people saying, you said exactly what I had a problem with. And I did that before I was a writer. Okay. And it tanked some of my books because people would read that review, they'd get mad, and they'd go 1-star my books. And that was frustrating, but I never took the review down because there were so many people who were affected by it, who really thought it put into words what they were feeling. And so I was willing to take that hit for their sake and for my own sake, to be honest. I used to, I'll admit, I have written reviews that were bitter and scathing many years ago. I don't do that anymore. And I try not, I won't rate a review. I won't write a review for a book that I didn't finish unless it's a stub that says, I didn't finish this. It's probably me, no hard feelings. And I agree with you that I think it's important that we put good stuff out there, that we find the things that we love and we celebrate them.
The only time I've written negative reviews are twofold. One, when I found books that I really loved when I was younger, and I go back and read them, I'm kind of reviewing them with older eyes. And I mentioned that I love this when I read this at this age, and I'm looking at this as an adult and going back. Because you can analyze some of it as just the writing style from like the 80s and 90s is different than what you see today and what the expectation as a reader is. And then some of that is you've just lived more life, right? And so you look at different things. But the other part of that is like the only other one I've given a 1 star. I wasn't even necessarily 1-starring the book. I was 1-starring whatever stupid intern digitized the book from the paperback because they missed full pages and chapters.
Oh
I
my
hate
goodness.
That is a whole topic. I don't want to talk about that. But yes, that.
No, that breaks the scale.
Yeah.
Team Yankee by Harold Coyle. I believe they've resolved the
No.
problems by now. I had the paperback and I'm like, why do I feel like I'm missing something? And then I was starting to compare the e-reader to my old battered paperback copy. I'm like, oh, because we're missing pages and chapters. All makes sense now. Amazon made them fix it. So I'm pretty sure it's been resolved. But at the time, I didn't see the warning that you can get on the top of an Amazon page where where like readers report a lot of technical issues. You'll get that warning. I didn't know what the warning was, so I just bought it anyway. So, all right.
Anyway,
Vincent.
that's my story. Go, Vincent.
Vincent, why don't you introduce yourself?
But y'all were being so interesting. Why have I had to talk? Oh
no.
Hello, I'm Fantasy Pigeon. Yes, you heard that right. My name is Pigeon, not a pen name, my actual name. I'm the mouth from the south, as some people call me. And I primarily write epic fantasy, looking to get into other fantasy genres. But I am not here as a writer like Melissa. I'm here as an enjoyer of YA, which is perhaps one of the most evergreen genres there is.
Amen.
I might push back on the evergreen only because evergreen in the capacity that the books might always be popular, but will it always be considered YA? I don't know. So
we can talk about that.
Let's do this is a young kids book. I believe it's technically classified as middle grade for our sponsor. We're going to air that now so we don't have to interrupt ourselves when we start talking about the story, because I do want to. But Robert Tilsley is a friend of the show. He's in my writing group, so we talk all the time. But he writes for kids, and he writes the Choose Your Own Adventure books that you can't call that because that's trademarked. I don't know what you pick up at, I guess. I don't know what they call them. Every time I picture someone writing one of those, though, to make everything work, I'm like picturing that serial killer scene where they've got the chalk or the cork board with all the strings going everywhere. That's how I picture you have to write those. But anyway, we're going to air the commercial, and then we're going to jump right in.
From Max Tilsley, author of Brains, the post-apocalyptic pick-a-path adventure with more than 60 endings, comes the Susie Steele Adventures. Susie has a heart of gold, a set of bad dreams, and a hidden destiny. 6 months ago, Susie's father went to work and never returned, leaving Susie to her hobby of chasing away nannies. That is, until the mysterious and glamorous Cassandra roars into her life, driving a red sports car and promising to be the best of friends. When Susie stumbles on her father's secret lair, a world of magic, ghosts and mysteries beckons. Can she discover the truth, avoid being expelled from school, and keep a ruthless secret society off her back? She's to have a ghost of a chance. She'll need the help of her best friends, one grumpy cat, and a whole lot of daring. The Susie Steele Adventures from R. Max Tilsley. Book 1, The Steel Trap. Book 2, The Steel Bite. Perfect for readers 9+. Available in print and ebook.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And I do think grumpy and cat, generally speaking, go together. I think it's almost oxymoronic, but we'll allow it. All right, I do realize we did forget to ask the one religion question for the day because we got distracted, and it's all my fault because we could have, fluffed out the beginning a little bit. But instead, I'm going to say we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. So, coffee or tea, and how are you drinking it today, Mr. Jordan?
I don't drink coffee. I don't drink tea. I drink hot chocolate.
All right.
Or
how
water.
do you drink chocolate?
Or water. I gave up soda at the beginning of the year. I'm down 8 pounds.
Congratulations. Nice. Do you do anything special with your hot chocolate or just drink it plain?
Marshmallows, but really with hot chocolate, what you see is what you get. But oh man, my mom has some hot chocolate from Mexico and it is the best.
That's good stuff.
I bet it's probably richer cocoa that's used as a base.
Yes.
All right. What about you, Melissa?
Well, I don't drink coffee or tea, but I am very fond of hot chocolate. But lately, my favorite beverage is called Old Jamaica Ginger Beer. And it is a really good ginger beer with just enough of a bite to be noticeable. It's not overly spicy for those who are not into overly spicy, which I kind of am. But I have to get it. If we can get it from the Instamart, it's a happy day. If not, I have to order it over Amazon. It takes a week to get here, and it comes packed in its little foam cooler, and it's really well packaged so it can make the trip from wherever in India it comes from. And I just love it. It's great.
Old Jamaican ginger beer. Okay.
Hmm.
What do they add from the Jamaican angle to flavor it?
I have no idea. It's Jamaican ginger, they say. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I looked at the ingredients to see, because it's partly sugar sweetened and partly sucralose sweetened. So it's lower in carbs than, say, your average soda, which is, that's great. And I can't tell the taste because the ginger covers whatever artificial flavoring, whatever artificial sweetener there is.
So does it have
But,
that Sprite 7-Up kind of taste?
No, it tastes like ginger. It's kind of mellow under the ginger. It's sweet, but not as biting as, say, Sprite or 7-Up. It's like you drink it and then there's sort of a tingle at the end when the ginger kicks in at the end of a swallow. So
Okay. What about you, Betsy?
Well, my good sir, I drink tea, you plebeian. Yeah,
Sweet
it's
tea ice is the way it's
tea.
intended. Strong enough to hold the
Tea.
spoon up. I know. I'm aware.
And when it's not sweet tea, it's Dr. Pepper, which I probably should stop drinking. But you can't give it the tea.
Yeah, we all gotta have our vices.
Mhm.
That's the one thing I missed since I started dieting is when we do the Chick-fil-A runs is I would get the Chick-fil-A sweet tea, and now I do the Diet Coke because it's got the 0 calories.
Yeah.
The things we do for our health.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So before we dive in deeper, we will define our terms in a second. But when you think YA books, what do you think, Jordan?
Well, there's Hunger Games on one side of the spectrum, and then on the other side of the spectrum, there's the works of Caroline B. Cooney. She's done some stuff with ghosts and whatnot, but when I think of her, I think of family dramas, and some of her books are, to this day, some of my favorite books. Books. There's my favorite YA book, I would have to say, is either A Friend at Midnight or What Child Is This? A Christmas Story. And these two books, they're not your usual YA fare. A Friend at Midnight focuses on a 15-year-old girl named Lily Rossetti who gets a phone call one morning from after her mom and stepdad drive her older sister to college, she gets a call from her younger brother, who's been living with her biological father. Her little brother, who's 7 years old, excuse me. No, 8 years old. Long story short, her father abandoned him at the airport. They live 3 states away. She has to figure out how to get him home before her mom and stepdad get back from dropping her sister off at college. And What Child Is This? A Christmas Story, again by Caroline B. Cooney. It raises some very heavy questions, but very respectfully handled, dealing with an 8-year-old girl who's in a foster home and wants a family of her own for Christmas. And these two books are outstandingly, they are heart-wrenching, they are tender, they raise important questions about religion, and they also treat it very respectfully. I cannot recommend these two books enough.
Okay. When you think, Melissa, when you think YA, what comes to mind for you?
What comes to mind first is that my definition for what is young adult fiction is stories that are about the experience of being a young adult, of being a teenager to late teens. And that a good YA book is something that isn't just for young readers of that age. It's for readers of any age, because if you aren't a teenager experiencing that situation, you've been a teenager and you can remember what it was like. So for me, I look at honestly, some of what's published as young adult today does not fit that description. They figure if it's got a teen protagonist, that's enough. But if the age of the protagonist were all that mattered, then To Kill a Mockingbird would be considered middle grade, which it definitely is not. So that's what I think. When I think of young adult fiction, I think, what is the experience it's offering? Is this the experience of a teen? And I'm glad you mentioned Carolyn B. Cooney, because she's fantastic.
All right.
So,
what comes to mind for you, Vincent?
Oh, so many books, so many. Off the top of my head, Christopher Paolini, David Eddings, Rick Riordan, the Percy Jackson series, and a little bit of Cassandra Sinclair, the Mortal Instruments. But I think that one a little bit more borderline between YA and middle grade.
So for me, like when I think YA, I tend to think like coming of age type stories along the lines that teach moral lessons along the lines like a Heinlein's Juveniles kind of thing. That's when I grew up. That's when I say YA, that's what I was kind of looking for. Those action adventure sort of aspirational stories for young men and young women with kind of ideas on what to aspire to be. Although I don't think that's what it is anymore. At this point, someone tells me YA and I ask what flavor of smut they're selling, because that's to be what we're getting these days in the market when someone says a book is YA. Most of the YA books that are out there, I would not let my young adult children who are still minors read, just because the content is not appropriate. So, and I noticed that the themes, I'm sure, are changing as well, because the coming of age is, one of what I would think of as a foundational theme for a YA story, but I don't know that that's true anymore.
No, I agree with you there. I think I misunderstood your question to begin with, but yeah, young adult, I would say it's the story of somebody who becomes no longer a child. I mean, you've got your middle grade stories that have a catastrophe or a crisis happen. Those are a dime a dozen. Bridge to Terabithia, for example, I wouldn't consider Bridge to Terabithia YA. It's definitely middle grade. It's excellent middle grade, but it's definitely middle grade. YA is much more of a sense of, after this, there's no going back. Or at least that's what it should be. And that's what I like about Cooney. She's very good at handling that needle.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that about what's middle grade and what's not. Can I give some background? And granted, I am not a scholar of young adult literature. This is just what I've observed in 40 years of reading and seeing the landscape change. Is that okay if I do that? And
absolutely.
I agree.
Okay, so basically for a long time, there was no young adult, there was no middle grade. It was all children's literature. And you got Carolyn B. Cooney lumped in with the Betsy Tacy books, with very young chapter books. It was all children's lit. When I was a young teenager, so like 12 or 13, I lived in Liverpool, New York, which is a suburb of Syracuse. And their public library was outstanding. It was actually well known nationally. And it was part because of their children's section. And I read Patricia McKillip for the first time in the children's section. There is no way that we would today call Patricia McKillip's books in any way young adult or children, but they didn't have any other category to put her books in. So the Riddle Master series was in the children's section. Cynthia Voigt was in the children's section. Anne McCaffrey's Harper Hall trilogy was in the children's section. And it wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s that we started getting people saying, we need to distinguish because there is something seriously different about the books we give our 8-year-olds than the books we give our 15-year-olds. And so they started calling it young adult literature, and then middle grade came along a little bit later, I think. Again, I am not a scholar of it, but when you look backward, that's what they start saying, okay, this was young adult. Okay, what was that?
So I just looked up middle grade.
Yes.
So it came about officially in 1967 with the Horn book, though its roots trace back to children's book from the 1850s to 1910s. So when I was going to give an example that I had written down, but I forgot to say, I was thinking along the lines of like Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Heidi, Little Women, right? Like those are what I thought of as when I would have thought of as YA, but according to the definitions, they actually would be considered middle grade books.
Right. And for a lot of that, it says solidified as a recognized category. It's not a publishing category till much later, but you get people arguing over what fit into middle grade because of that, because it was not something that you named. And you could fight over, is Tom Sawyer classic literature? Is it a middle grade book? Is Huckleberry Finn a young adult book? And one of my favorite books that qualifies as young adult is called The Perilous Guard. It's by Elizabeth Marie Pope. And it is not quite fantasy, not quite fiction. It's historical fiction about a young woman who goes to a house that's called the Perilous Guard, G-A-R-D, in the sense of being a keep or a fortress, and encounters people who may or may not be fairies. And it is extremely complex and really beautifully written. But where's that category again? The Witch of Blackbird Pond, again, middle grade or young adult. And so because we didn't have that distinction, you could look back and people will discuss, what do I think it fits? And some of it says more about who you are as a reader than publishing category, because people have instincts about, okay, to me this is middle grade, to me this is young adult. And for me, in my critical sense, that's where it gets exciting, because you learn more about people and what they think when you're discussing and saying, okay, this is not really solid, this does not have a concrete, I could make a case either way. So anyway, the point is that young adult as a publishing category was something that comes along a little later. I remember taking a young adult literature class in 1994, and it was considered a new category. So historians look at it differently, but from the point of view of the reader, you didn't have young adult until the early 90s. The young adult is even in a form that we can even totally recall.
So they recognize it in the genre in the late 1960s with books like S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders and The Contender.
Right.
But you're right, when it's recognized as the literature style of story versus when it's a genre from a marketing angle are different.
Right, and because they're so distinct, like The Outsiders, like Cynthia Voigt Homecoming, Carolyn B. Cooney wrote The Voice on the Radio, and yes, and so it was obvious that they were different. It was obvious that these were different kinds of books, but it wasn't something that people were really talking about as readers. Okay. Critics were talking about it, but it didn't trickle down very well. And I remember this because my mother had a really hard time finding books for me. She was not a reader by choice because she got really involved in books. She said she stayed home from church one day to finish reading The Thornbirds, if I can out her. And so when she had children, she kind of stopped reading because she was afraid she wouldn't be able to do both. And so she was not familiar with young adult or whatever. She was just finding me whatever she could, and I was grateful for it because it meant I read stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have chosen. But again, the distinction for readers did not happen until later than what happened in the critical sense. Okay, so like The Outsiders, that's what librarians were saying, but they didn't start categorizing it until later. And The Outsiders in the 19, and that was, what did you say over here? 1967, yes. So The Outsiders really was a turning point, the way I think Twilight was for our generation, for modern generation.
Officially, librarians in the 1940s, the first notable one was a lady named Margaret Scoggin, began identifying books for teens with Maureen Daly's 17th Summer in 1942, which they're calling the first YA number, YA book. But they that was the librarians trying to set aside books that they thought would appeal to young readers, not a classification. The only one I'd push back on is when you talked about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer being classical literature. You can't start by calling something classical literature, because for it to be classical, it has to have lasted long enough to get to that point. So
not classical, classic.
Classic. Even still.
Well, classic literature is a useful category that doesn't really have any meaning. It's like the distinction between middle grade and young adult in some ways, that people will they know it when they see it. Basically,
when I think
you can argue that point. Yeah.
When I think classic literature, I think something that stood the test of time to enough that it's lasted to become a classic, like a classic car, right? It's been around a little while. And so you can't start a novel by calling it a classic. You have to start by calling it whatever it is, and then it becomes a classic because it's got longevity.
Okay. But are you going to say that a book written in the late 1800s is, what is it? I don't remember when Tom Sawyer, and I can't look it up because I don't have time. But I think Mark Twain has been around long enough to call it classic now. I think he qualifies.
Wasn't it?
I think 1850s, maybe.
Yeah.
It was late. It was later than 1850. I don't remember. Hang on, I'll look it up.
1859, I think.
I wouldn't call it. I would call it definitely classic now. I'm saying, but when you look at a book, it's valuable to look at how it would have been classified when it was published.
That's true, but also now matters too. Honestly, I think. Let me see. Tom Sawyer was published in 1876, which is funny because that was the number I had in my head, and I had no idea.
I was only off by 20 years. So, I said 56.
Yeah. So it's now classic fiction. I'm pretty sure that it was not considered an improving book, which would have been aimed at young adults and kids back in the late 1800s. They genuinely did not have young adult fiction. But that's the fun thing about it. That's the great thing about it, is you can have that discussion and say, well, what does that qualify as now? Can you read it as a young adult novel today? And that answer is going to be different for everybody. And that's wonderful, because we get to know it better by having that discussion or argument. It could be an argument too.
So now I'm going to define terms. And as usual, dear listener, we use Wikipedia because it's the one source that I can consistently cite, that I can find just about everything for the podcast on and link to. So there's some uniformity. And it does not feel like we're picking and choosing to make the definitions fit what we want if we're consistent. So according to Wikipedia, young adult fiction or young adult literature is a publishing category of literature written, marketed, and geared towards adolescents and young adults, typically ranging from ages 12 to 18 or sometimes up to 25. These stories often features teenage protagonists navigating coming-of-age experiences, self-discovery, identity, and intense emotions, including themes of first love, friendship, and rebellion. First, and then they've got some key themes that identifies. Before we go to the key characteristics and themes, are you good with the generic definition?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I think it's
I'll
good.
go with it.
But by that definition, you could say that the book's genre would be YA.
which they weren't marketed as. But you could totally call it that. And David Eddings, the Belgariad, also not marketed as young adult, but it's a coming-of-age story.
Mm-hmm.
The Shannara Chronicles, the guy was, no, you're right. He was coming of age. You're right. It depends on where in the series you picked up. But
at least the first book, the Sword of Shannara. That's definitely.
Yeah, I think the first one was the only one that was actually close to Lord of the Rings. All the rest did their own thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that characteristic of a YA fiction is they classify as the target audience versus the readers. While written for teens, a significant portion of YA literature is consumed by adults, with studies suggesting that over half of YA readers are over 18, which is why you see the adultification of some of the genre, to the fact that it's leaning more into the what I would call mature content on some of it. And not to say kids at 18 aren't thinking about that, but if your age range is 12 to 18, maybe you don't want the 12-year-old thinking of that, which is my contention with modern YA. So the next is content and style. YA novels are categorized by a fast-paced, often first-person and relatable writing style. While they can cover heavy topics, including social issues and intense emotional experiences, they are distinct from children's literature or adult fiction. I would push back on that one, and you guys can jump in. I don't believe that they're distinct from adult fiction anymore.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would push back on that too.
They haven't been for a long time, truth be told. Because I remember when... I mean, that's not to say that there hasn't been often some stunningly graphic violence in what we would normally call middle grade stories. But a lot of those stories tended not to be about people. You can get away with a lot in xenofiction when it's about animals.
Yeah.
But when I think of YA in terms of more graphic material, there's the Hunger Games, which is actually pretty muted. Suzanne Collins is not nearly as gratuitous as she could be. And even when she does lean into it, it's often to show just how depraved the world is. And then you have people like Michael Grant and his Gone series, where he's gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous and shocking. And I really actively dislike those books.
Okay. The next... go ahead, Vincent.
I had one customer at my work try to say that Fourth Wing was YA. Like,
it is, but it's not.
No,
it is, but it's not. Oh, that's how they're selling it.
They're selling it as YA, but it's the example of YA intersecting with the smut genre.
Yeah.
It is YA. It's 50 Shades dressed up as YA with dragons, if memory serves.
Yeah.
So it's one of those ones where the evolution of YA has happened partly because of marketing, and when they realized it had such a niche audience, they started putting as much as they could into that category, everything but the kitchen sink, because it got audience. And so now you have almost a delineation with what you would consider almost clean YA and then mature YA. But if you have to separate at that point, what I would consider the mature YA, like Fourth Wing, why call it YA at that point? Just acknowledge.
I agree, because I would not ever let any of my kids read that.
So the next key characteristic that they list of YA fiction is the common themes that include the search for independence, dealing with peer pressure, first love, and the transition to adulthood. So basically the coming of age stuff that has been mentioned, which is why you sometimes get the angsty teen character that you just want to smack through the book pages. And sometimes the characters that are just too stupid to live.
And that all falls under my definition of the experience of being a young adult, because that's all something that young adults go through. So, to some degree. I don't think I was ever an angsty teen, but it sure works.
At the age I would have been potentially in that angsty teen category. I already enlisted in the Army, and they had ways of dealing with that. So not quite the same thing for most people. But
when I was at that age, I had my notes building in the book. I mind to read.
So this is
I'm playing out my angst in a book.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one of the characteristics of YA they list as genre. YA is a category, not a genre, meaning it spans across fantasy, science fiction, romance, dystopia, and contemporary, and similar to any other definition. And so I don't think you can really. I mean, that's just a fact. I think much like horror can fit in any. It's a category, not a genre, as well. I would think, because you could put horror into any of them. I think
it's nitpicking. I think it's nitpicking, because once you get down into it's YA fantasy, that's a genre. And so you can call it a category, but I think people will still blur the lines between the two. But I think it's useful, because it is true that young adult fiction does not have to be any one type of literature. So yeah, I guess I go with that.
Yeah, if we get too nitpicky, you can say that Dune is YA and
Right.
etc.
And so
I'm not going to
finally,
call Dune YA.
finally the definition, key characteristic is this distinct from middle grade. So unlike middle grade fiction, which features younger protagonists, often aged 10 to 14, YA focuses on the teenage experience, which according to the master class, which they're citing as a source, somebody did a master class on YA fiction, is often more complex in its exploration of maturity. So that makes sense because your target audience is younger. You're going to simplify things, not dumb it down, but
No.
write it age appropriate.
No, and there's some really fantastic middle grade fiction and fantasy too. So I'm glad they make that distinction. But I guess the only thing I ever push back on is the idea that it's more simply written. I would definitely say that is not a given for either middle grade or young adult fiction. I don't think that's relevant. I don't think that's how you can tell.
Yeah,
So-
I agree with you.
Ditto.
I've when I see those two genres, you tend not to get a lot of purple prose that are throwing super big words out there just to be, hoity-toity. So when I say simply written, I mean they're more plain language. Of course, what everyone defines as that is depending on how well read you are. Because what I think of as normal language, other people look at me like I'm speaking a foreign language. So I get what you're saying, but for me, like, they're not going out of their way to sound pretentious because they know their audience is younger. So they're speaking to them where they are.
Yeah, that's true.
So that is according to Wikipedia, which is what we use for the source, the definition. So now that we've got that out of the way, we picked that apart. You were saying something about the evolution that you noticed, Melissa, in the pre-show that I wanted to give you some time to cover that you've seen change.
Something I noticed about the evolution, and one that's a key factor and relates to why so much young adult fiction is being consumed by older, usually female readers, is that when I was actively working as a literary critic, when I was actively writing and honestly promoting young adult fantasy, young adult fiction, it was like pulling teeth to get adult readers to want to read it. And these were fantastic, complex books. I mean, the fantasy scene in the 1980s was a little stagnant in terms of what people actively got. Okay, there was a lot of epic fantasy, and you could find other stuff. I'm not saying there wasn't. There was actually a wide variety, but in terms of what was being promoted, yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that you're mentioning, that you mentioned with your female reader specifically, is fantasy that was written in the 60s and 70s. If you look at their covers, I don't want to call it misogynistic because I think that word is overused, but it was definitely centered on the male gaze.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You saw a lot of scantily clad women in fur bikinis, think Conan style. And so when you're trying to target a female audience, those covers just don't resonate with them.
Yeah. And it kind of turned around. Yeah.
That's one of the things James Ward, when we had him on the show before he passed, talked about that they had to do to get girls into gaming is they had to evolve what they were showing on the covers because those covers were actively turning off the female audience, who said, oh, okay, well, that's cueing me. It's not for me, even if they might have enjoyed it. And so you're dealing with the residuals of that, because I think the 80s, where you're talking about, is when you started seeing a shift from I don't know how you'd classify the covers from the 60s and 70s, but from that style of image to what we, became what we have now, the evolution. The 80s is when you stopped seeing as much of the lady flesh on the covers, shall we say.
Yeah, and you had the marvelous Daryl K. Sweet doing covers for almost everyone in fantasy. He did covers for Patricia McKillip and David Eddings. He did Robert Jordan later, some of the early Robert Jordans. Anyway, you get to recognize his art, and so the mid 80s, was where young adult fantasy was really pushing the boundaries of what fantasy could be. And I was trying to convince people of this, and adult readers would look at the covers. They would say, oh, it's for children, it's for young adult. Like I said, the definition of young adult had not yet percolated down. And I remember giving my sister-in-law, she's like, what can I read next? And I gave her a copy of Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a wonderful story. And she looked at the cover, which is, granted, a really stupid cover in the edition I had. I no longer have that one. And she's like, no, I can't read this. This is dumb. And so there was this attitude, like it was not a thing. You didn't read young adult if you were an adult. And it happened in the fantasy fandom too. You had a lot of readers who went, especially the male readers, I think, went straight from reading kids' books to reading adult fantasy. And they skipped everything that was in young adult fantasy just because it wasn't well known. It was for kids. And you just didn't, getting them to read it in the 90s was really hard. And then you have Stephanie Meyer come along in 2005 and write Twilight. And all of a sudden, young adult fiction was cool because you saw women reading it. You saw them reading it with their daughters, and whatever its flaws, it marked a huge change in what was acceptable for adults to read. And so I am kind of grateful to her for making that happen. And if it hadn't been her, it probably would have been Suzanne Collins. That was a couple of years later. I think that was Hunger Games is 2008. And so that's what interests me about the evolution of young adult, is that switch from nobody wants to read it as an adult to everyone wants to read it as an adult. And yeah, sometimes that means you get adult content like A Court of Thorns and Roses or Fourth Wing. But at least at least it's acceptable to the point that adult readers will also read things like Harry Potter. They'll read they read The Hunger Games, which I think is pretty great. And they will read, maybe under plain wrappers. I've read about people reading the Harry Potter books on the tube who they did a whole different edition that wasn't those beautiful Mary Grand-Pré illustrations that were just plain covers so that adults could read it and not look stupid. That doesn't happen anymore. So that's an aspect of the evolution that I think is fantastic.
And you saw that a lot with some of them in the beginning days, with some of the mature content, the rated above R type books that were marketed as romance. Those had the same alt cover so people could read them in public. But now that everyone's e-reading everything, they don't bother with those either, because who's going to see the cover? They're just going to see your e-reader, right? Your tablet, whatever. I did link to, I will link to Howl's Moving Castle. The cover is listed for the hardcover, for the mass market, and the ebook has one of the original covers. So I'll link that in the show notes to your listeners so you can check that out. They made that into an anime, it looks like.
They did.
And it was very well done. I saw it. I think it was Ghibli that did it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I had heard of the anime. I did not realize it was based on a story.
Yeah, totally.
Kiki's Delivery Service was a children's book too.
Oh, that's right.
What was?
Kiki's Delivery Service.
But that one, long story short, for me, Studio Ghibli with Miyazaki was the anime studio that broke out into Western cultures before anybody else, and is to this day held as the gold standard for Western audiences. They did Spirited Away. They did Kiki's Delivery Service. They ripped everybody's hearts out and stomped on them with Grave of the Fireflies.
Too soon.
Okay. So
and actually, that studio in itself is a very good microcosm of YA. You've got,
I agree.
You've got 14. You've got. I mean, how old is the boy in Grave of the Fireflies? 14. I mean, he's
13, 14.
He's the age of your traditional YA protagonist, and the story is soul crushing. And then you've got Kiki, who's 13, who's okay. That's a little bit on the younger side for YA. That's more upper.
But she goes out,
But she's upper middle grade, and she's got peers who can drive, even if she doesn't actually go along with them.
Yeah.
And then you've got Spirited Away, which is the best of the lot, but it's also the most, but Jiro's 10.
Mhm.
And we're getting off the subject, but the long and short of it is, the reason I think there's a market for YA books is that there's always been a market for teenagers taking that step.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's the hard part, though, is when you have terms that get so broad, they're almost useless at a certain point in time. So now almost everything.
You're not wrong there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like
Look
to
at-
attack on to. Sorry, Jordan. You go ahead.
yeah, I mean, to get back to literature, look at the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. They're Frank and Joe are 16, 17, 18. I think they changed their ages a little bit as in the 60s with the relaunch. Nancy Drew's been 18 and 16. And unless we count the spin-off, the case files and the Hardy Boys had their also darker and edgier spin-off in the 80s and 90s. Neither one of those series in their classic incarnation, anybody in their right mind would consider YA, even if the age of the protagonist is right.
Yeah, they were written for middle school kids, for the target audience. They're middle.
Even middle school is probably a stretch.
Mhm.
But they're comfortably middle grade.
Yeah. So that's where, it's not just the strict age of the protagonist that's the defining characteristic, because I've written stories that are, somewhat of a coming of age, young 18-year-old man in a military setting for middle sci-fi. There's no way in hell I'd call that a coming of age YA story, though. Even though at its surface they've got the right age, the coming of age story, right? But it's and the themes overlap. But I think when I think YA, I don't think YA mill sci-fi. I don't think those two go together. Someone's going to at me and tell me there's examples, but I think if the terms get too broad, it does make it harder, because part of the reason the categories exist is to help readers find the right books.
Right.
So you can find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to attack on a little bit to what. Oh, sorry, Jordan. Go ahead.
Oh,
Jordan.
no, you go.
To circle back a little bit to what Jordan was saying, you can almost say almost all anime is YA if you make it so broad, but a whole bunch now you'll say completely not YA at all, like Gundam for example, but technically I think the pro tag is 16 in that 16, 17.
Okay. I did look it up. So the Howl's Moving Castle came out in 86, it looks like.
Yeah.
Hey, it's going to turn 40.
Oh, now I feel really old. Thank you.
What I was doing in 86. Move on. I was around for that. I was reading in 86. But so I think there is, on the one hand, broad definitions make it easy for, you to kind of get the gist of it. But I do think it gets too broad. It makes it also harder, because like you said, the whole point of this is to get readers. If you liked this, then you'll like that, right? That's the whole point of the categories. And that's what the librarians back in the 40s were doing when that first librarian, Miss Scoggins, was separating up books. If you like this book that was geared towards you as a young reader, you'll like this book, which is kind of like it. And so I do think, unfortunately, we got two problems. One, marketing companies are really good at doing their job, so they're trying to get the categories that are niche and going to get people eyeballs. And the flip side of that is with the narrowing of the markets via e-readers, everything is so niche that you might not ever stop reading about the one-eyed midget bounty hunter category, and that's all you read, and there's thousands of books in that category. That might actually be a thing. I don't know. I thought I was making it up, but if it is, you're welcome. But
honestly, check Bane books. There probably is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
But the point is, on the one hand, we get readers that focus so narrowly, and then the marketing makes the term so broad, and it kind of like they're butting heads trying to get people to find books. And then you get people with analysis paralysis. And we were at a point where it's hard for people to find books, which is why we get people that'll send me emails like, JR, I've read every one of the books in your commercials. More commercials, please. Because they're at the point where, like, what do I read next? Because there are so many choices.
Wait a second. There is a one-eyed bounty hunter. Boss Shackleford.
Oh my gosh. And you thought you were being original, JR.
I know. Back to the drawing board. So I know this is a broad topic, and we could keep going, and we get a different set of panelists, and we'll have a completely different discussion about the same topic. It reminds me of that one anthology put together where they gave all of the authors in a literary course the same outline, and every one of them wrote different stories. Because it resonates with you differently. Like literature hits you where you are, and like you said, it's as much reflection of the reader as it is the category and the author. So I think at this point we should probably wrap it up, unless you guys have closing thoughts. And if we've got more topics in the YA category, I think it would definitely warrant a second episode. There's definitely room there. I think we're trying to be very broad on the first one, and we've covered that. So
I think it'd be great to cover specifically YA fantasy and science fiction, because that's huge all by itself. So
all right, I'm leaving that down for future episodes.
I think it might be wise to distinguish between YA sci-fi and fantasy and YA dystopian, because there's a difference between YA aliens and planets, because you could call Ender's Game YA, but I wouldn't put Ender's Game on the same shelf as the dystopian Hunger Games or the semi-dystopian Giver Quartet. Though Giver Quartet probably straddles the line between middle grade and YA. Or at least the Giver in its own right. The last three books are probably, well, Sun is definitely YA.
I'll also add that we could have an episode about talking about what the difference between YA from the 80s and YA from now.
That's kind of what the evolution was. The topic for today is the evolution of YA. I think we kind of did that.
But narrow it down.
Yeah, but much more narrow, because I would think David Eddings out YA, but you also could say that Chainsaw Man is YA because the main character in that is 16. Me, I don't consider it be YA, but you could say it is.
And then there's
So with that, we've got lots of room to come back to a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak, to come back to this topic. So closing thoughts before we wrap it up, Vincent.
YA is like I said, perhaps one of the more evergreen genres, because there always will be teenagers as long as there is humanity, and we're probably going to be here for a long time.
Okay. Jordan, final thoughts.
I don't have much else to say. I think with YA, I think the thing of it is, with YA, I think the lasting impact, what YA books actually work to help a young adult become an adult.
Okay. That's a fair distinction. Is that's the moral lesson, kind of like what I hinted at with the Heinlein's Juveniles, right? They were the moral lessons, the evolution of the passion plays from back in the day.
We all have everybody loves a good adventure. But what stays with you? What makes you realize that there is more to all of this than just that? And once again, Caroline Cooney is superbly talented at that.
All right, and Melissa, final thoughts.
Well, this has been great. You guys are really hitting all the great points. I'm really pleased. I don't know. I think Jordan's right, saying that young adult literature is part of what teaches young adults to be adults and helps you work through situations that are maybe going on in your own life that you can safely read about because you can put the book down. And so I think young adult is, and like Vincent said, it's always going to be with us because we're always going to have young adults, which is great. So yeah, I think it's a great, either you call it a category, you call it a genre, but in either case, I think it's really valuable and really wonderful that even adults are reading it now, however they're reading.
Absolutely. All right. So this is the part where I remind you, dear listener, to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. It really does make a difference. And with that, Vincent, where might people find you on the wild interwebs?
Great question. You can find me on Substack, the Pigeon Coop. You can also find me on my Facebook and Twitter, though I don't really use the Twitter too much. And that's about it.
Okay. And then Jordan, where might we find you on the wild interwebs?
Jordan needs to get his head out of his butt and finally finish setting up his Substack. But beyond that, I do have an Amazon page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I will have all that linked, and before this airs, he assures me he will have that Substack ready for you, so you can take a peep when this show airs at the end of February. And finally, Melissa, where might we find you on the wild interwebs?
Well, my website is melissamcShaneWrites.com. I also have a storefront selling all my books in print and ebook and some audiobooks, the ones that exist, at nightharborpress.com. And I'm on Twitter X as M. McShane Writes, and I have a readers group on Facebook. And obviously I should get a Substack because all the popular kids are doing it since you guys are. So clearly.
Yeah, I moved my newsletter from Something Monkeys to Substack because it was easier to use and free.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that.
I'm still trying to figure out what kind of content I want for my Substack.
Yeah.
I tried poems that didn't work out too well because I ended up writing another book.
That'll do it. All right. And then you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blaze Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blaze Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChute, the Rumble, the YouTube, the TikTok, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Blasters and Blaze Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandblazespodcast@gmail.com. Again, Blasters and Blaze podcast@gmail.com. Ooh, I almost went mind blank there for a second. We keep that for professional purposes only and say the shenanigans from Madam Stabby Stabb over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till they get high on their own supply. If you want some of that coffee brand coffee, the link is in the show notes. The discount code is Podcast Grunts. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters Blaze Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it.